What are the effects of Dasha cycles? Elements, gunas, life lessons, the natural status of the planet. All of this is vital when you want to make predictions and prescribe remedies for people. I break it out in this video. Okay, so I'm talking about the different effects that happen when dashas change. And you see behind me I have listed the 9 planets in the Vimshottari Dasha scheme and the order in which they unfold. Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury. And I have next to them some letters, and I'm going to go through what they are. The M means malefic or benefic, right, which is the general nature of the planet. This is the element, fire, water, air. The next is the guna, tamasic, rajasic, sattvic. And the next and the final one has to do with the purpose and direction and, you would say, sort of remedy or higher purpose that this dasha cycle is wanting to bring into our life, and how the soul evolves based on this. Now, I'm talking about this because regardless of any other environmental situations like transits, even like aspects or other yogas or whatever else is going on, when we have the planetary dasha cycles, these are, the way the karmas are unfolding. And so when you're reading a chart, you're really reading the dashas and the way these type of structures are delivering the karmas to the person, especially the first and secondary level. The secondary level is the main cycle of immediate karma. Because the Mahadasha cycle, like for instance, even if it's a short one like Ketu or the Sun or Mars, is still 7 years, 6 years if it's the Sun. And that's too long of a chunk of time. That's the overall cycle, and some of them, like for Saturn, 19 years, Venus, 20 years, it's at times a third or a fourth of someone's life. But the secondary is really the one where you see the most urgent karmas that the person is working on at that time. And of course, they fit within each other, with the Mahadasha cycle being the larger part of the funnel. Then it funnels down into the secondary, or what some people call the Bhukti, or the Antardasha. And then you have even the third level. When you get into long Mahadasha cycles like Venus, you would even have a secondary Dasha cycle like Venus. Venus is almost 3 years. So the third level would become important. So all of these affectations then show you how the Dasha cycle affects a person's constitution, both physical, mental, spiritual, psychological. And based on what the planets rule in the chart, you see how those, the timing of specific karmas ripen. So, for example, if someone, let's say they're running a Sun Dasha, the Sun might be, obviously the Sun is the 6-year cycle. It's a natural malefic, which means the Sun burns and makes things that are intense. It's a fiery type of energy. In fact, it's the indicator of fire, which is to purify and to burn and to illuminate and clarify. But it does it for a sattvic purpose, which means that it's burning and clarifying and illuminating to show us the truth. And its main purpose is to give vision to our life so we can see where we're going, so that we have a sense of purpose and a sense of direction, because when it's dark, we can't see where we're going. So the Sun, the main purpose is that vision. We can compare it, let's say, with Mars. Mars is also a natural malefic, which is to bring things that are intense. and that will create a certain struggle in our life. That's what the malefic means. Doesn't mean it's bad. It means it brings things that are going to challenge us. And we like the challenge. We like the challenge with the sun to, find a higher vision and purpose. We enjoy it at that time. That's what we're going to be doing, or that's what we should be doing. And if we're not able to do it, then we'll suffer because we're not able to rise to the challenge and take on that struggle to express ourselves. But with Mars, it's not only a malefic and fiery planet, but it's also tamasic. So Mars brings that fiery energy to destroy things that are making us weak. The sun brings the fire in a sattvic way to connect us with a vision and a purpose, not to destroy what's making us weak. In fact, we want to kind of push that aside and say, I don't care about this weak thing. I want that thing. This is the real nature. But in the Mars Dasha, we're not focused so much on the vision. We're focused on destroying what's making us weak. And by the way, these are general principles that you can see. When someone's Mars is too prominent, sometimes they can sacrifice their vision because they're too busy fighting battles, trying to destroy everything, right? And so the real nature with Mars is strength, getting personally strong. And the real sort of transformation that has to happen is the discipline to be personally strong within ourselves rather than fighting battles everywhere against people and against situations. So instead of always putting out fires, we're actually going somewhere with it. But Mars is the planet of getting strong personally, right? So, for example, each one of these planets, when the Dasha cycles run, we wind up engaged. Now, all of these things affect us spiritually, physically. The practice, for instance, of Ayurveda is extremely important in helping us to, suggest to a client, for example, what kind of, elemental effects will be prominent during those times. Again, you can always know that if someone is in a Sun or a Mars or a Ketu Dasha, for example, there's going to be quite a bit of fire. It'll be more fire, perhaps even Jupiter, because Jupiter is fire and water. It depends on Jupiter because he rules both a fiery and a watery sign, and he's got both fire and the watery nature. Jupiter also has the nature of space because he rules the bhuta of the akash, or of the space. The spacious quality of Jupiter has to do with his expansive nature. So it's this nature of vision and purpose, similar to the sun, because he's also sattvic. But the way we experience that spaciousness of Jupiter, who is the ruler of Akash and space, the way we experience it is either in a very fiery way or in a more watery way. I showed my chart recently, and I have Jupiter in Pisces. So even though Jupiter is also a fiery planet, I actually experience Jupiter in a much more watery way, in a more metaphysical, emotional, or devotional way. Some people who would have it, let's say, it's usually the way you can experience or the way you can delineate this is if Jupiter's in a masculine sign, it's going to be more fiery. If it's in a feminine sign, it's going to be more watery because of those, genders. Even if the masculine sign is air, like if Jupiter's in an air sign, he's going to express more of his masculine quality, which is going to be more fiery. So ponder that. But again, if you get Jupiter in his element, like Jupiter in a fire sign, this is why Jupiter in any fire sign is going to feel quite good, because Jupiter rules a fire sign. Jupiter in a watery sign, whether it's Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, is going to be more watery, and he'll be in his element. So you can see that when Jupiter runs, Jupiter is a benefic, naturally oriented towards giving, right, in a beneficial way. And fire and water, sattvic, which is about bringing goodness, and Jupiter is always looking for a sense of purpose. And we find that purpose in some kind of action, which is fiery, or some kind of feeling or metaphysical purpose, which is beyond the qualities of this earth. So again, these things affect the person's physiology. This is why, like, let's say in a Jupiter Dasha, the person might tend to gain weight, because Jupiter is big and expansive. And again, especially the watery quality, certainly leads to weight gain. And also when you look at the Dhatu that Jupiter rules in Ayurveda, the Dhatu, Jupiter rules the fat Dhatu. And the fat Dhatu obviously makes something, heavier. And even the name of Jupiter, Guru, means heavy. But the fat Dhatu also has to do with the brain. That's why Jupiter has to do with wisdom. Wisdom in the brain. Because the brain is mainly fat. Right? This is why animals eat other animals' brains, because it probably tastes good because it's all fat. Little, diversion there. But so again, all of these Ayurvedic principles are also important, especially with the each one of the planets rule one of the tissues or one of the dhatus, except for the nodes. But the Sun rules the bone dhatu, Venus rules Shukra or the sperm dhatu, which is the ojas and the vitality. The Moon rules the blood, Rakta. Mars rules Majja, or the nerve tissue in Ayurveda. Rahu doesn't rule one, but Jupiter rules the Meta, or the fat, like I said. Saturn rules the Mamsa, or the muscle, which shows the willingness to commit and work hard. This is what Saturn is. You build muscle because you do it over and over again, not because you just exert energy, but you exert energy over and over again. That's why Saturn rules muscle, and Mercury rules the lymph, or the rasa, the rasa dhatu. So again, all of these things come into play when you start trying to find remedies for people, spiritual healing, when you try to find out how their body is going to change, how their physiology will change in different dashas. So the connection between Ayurveda and Vedic astrology is really deep. And when you try to find remedies, for example, to help people, you have to be able to look in a chart. You look at the planet in one sense, and you look at the sign and the effect that the sign has. The sign is the psychological environment on the planet. Because again, the planets are the masters. They're the ones that are creating the power in the body. But they go into an environment where the mind and the samskaras of the mind have an influence. You take that raw power of Venus and that basic principle and that Shakti, or that power of Venus, and then you put it in a psychological environment where it's conducive for some things, not for others. So that Venus in the air sign is going to be conducive for the quality of Venus that likes to speak and that likes to interact with others and likes to be in that social environment, which is what air is. But it's also going to stimulate the senses. And this is the problem with Venus, is getting maturity with the senses. And it's going to, undermine that, perhaps. And so, again, bringing a certain type of spiritual healing into that environment is going to be important. But first, we need to understand all of these factors. So this is just a quick sort of overview of each of the planets and how you see the influence and what influences karmas specifically when dasha cycles run. One of the problems with astrology is we just throw all this stuff in a big bag and we say, oh, Venus, oh, that's this, and Ketu, oh, that's this, and we don't have a structure to hang things on where we understand. Ketu is a malefic. I have a question mark next to its natural status and its element because the nodes, Ketu and Rahu, are both question marks. Because again, Rahu might be a malefic, but it can also be joined, natural benefics in their own sign. Like for instance, in my chart, I use my chart as an example. Rahu is a malefic, but it's actually with its ruler in the first house forming like 4 Raja Yogas. So it winds up, even though it's malefic, it winds up being actually quite a helpful planet for what it does. Its nature and the natural status of the nodes as being malefic is in that they create stress and confusion. But if they're with planets that are bringing awareness and intelligence, especially a planet in its own sign, then that confusion leads to enormous insight very quickly. So this is why they're more of a wild card. And again, Ketu brings fire. Its nature is quite fiery, to be, very, full of discernment and criticism. But again, if it's in a watery sign, it can be watery very easily. You get Ketu with Jupiter in Pisces, and it's not going to really have as much of that fiery nature anymore. It's still going to be looking for that discernment, but it'll be in a very kind of abstract, watery, metaphysical way. Same way with Rahu. It's more, Rahu naturally brings more airy sort of essence. But again, if you get Rahu in an earth sign, I've seen it, especially things like Rahu, Mercury in Virgo, it's very earthy and grounded. Of course, Rahu in, Taurus is in it's said to be in its exalted sign. It can be very earthy, but it still has that restlessness of Rahu, which is the airy quality. So again, these are very subtle sort of distinctions, but it's still always sort of a tamasic energy, which naturally brings a kind of obscuring quality first. This is what the guna of the nodes are about. I'm very gentle on the gunas of the nodes at this point because I see them as being more shape-shifting energies, but the default kind of sort of guna and sort of quality, which is actually what the guna is, for the nodes is initially kind of confusing, which definitely falls in the realm of tamas. But again, as I said, if you get the node with its ruler, especially if the ruler is forming a bunch of yogas and whatnot, that initial confusion can lead to enormous insight very quickly. But it's still naturally going to bring confusion at first. Of course, Jupiter, Sattvic, Saturn, Tamasic, Mercury, Rajasic, full of a lot of energy. When I teach this stuff, it really helps people unwind what's really happening with our karmas, both physically, psychologically, and spiritually. And so I am teaching this to my students in San Diego in March 23rd through 25th. I'm making this video for them to understand what we're going to be looking at, but I also thought I would share it with people online and share it with others so they can also see a kind of general matrix through which you start to evaluate the spiritual factors that a person is going through and the remedies that you might bring forth to help them. And, again, this is a basic structure of planets. There's a lot more about the planets that I'm not really talking about here, especially what they rule. Then we also have signs, all the attributes of signs, all the attributes of nakshatras, of houses. And then, of course, when you start looking at these things in astrology charts, specifically and going over case studies and seeing how when someone's moon dasha started, you can see that the karma really affected their mind. They kind of, like let's say that the difficult qualities of the moon, when the moon started, you saw how it really affected their mind. They maybe kind of lost touch with reality a little bit. Same way with Mercury. Mercury also has to do a lot with the intellect and the mind and being able to understand and comprehend things. Comprehension is very important. And the Mercury Dasha really challenges us to be sort of playful and question our paradigm and our seriousness. So I've been teaching these things for a long time, and I love teaching it, especially showing it in chart after chart, and seeing how the elemental factors are not different from the physical factors, and they're not different from the overall nature of the planet to bring this thing into existence. And you see that in the guna, you see that in the element, you see that in its natural status as a benefic or a malefic, and through fire and air, and through tamasic, rajas, or sattva, and aligned with this purpose. This is the deep structure of how to understand the planets and their dasha cycle. Especially I'm talking about Vimshotri dasha cycle and how the karmas enter the mind first. This is why Vimshotri is so powerful, because karma enters the mind first. And then the actions are determined by how we follow those seeds. And the karma shows our tendency. It doesn't show exactly what we're going to do. It's a pretty strong indicator of what the person would do, but there's always presence that we introduce and make a decision based on those tendencies and those variables, and that decision is not a closed-ended proposition. There's not 100% predeterminism. Don't care when anyone says it's not true, because there is presence in the mind. Some call it free will. That's fine if you want to call it free will. What I call it is presence, which means regardless of how you're patterned, regardless of your tendency, you still live each moment And that moment, you have a choice within that moment. And it's harder to make the creative choice when you're not programmed to do that. When the planet is really weak and unconscious and ignorant, it's harder to see the light in that moment. But there's always situations where people, even under the most difficult circumstances with the most difficult planet, wind up taking and choosing the more creative option. But the thing is they usually do it after immense suffering, when the planet is really weak. That's what the karma is that we don't get the lesson until we've made 100 mistakes. Then we finally do it right. That's what the karma is. That's the karma of the suffering, is we keep making mistakes because we don't see the truth. Eventually, we do the right thing after we've suffered and we've tortured everybody around us with our mistakes. And then hopefully we start to learn, and then doing the right thing is still difficult. So these are the kind of things I'm going to get into with the San Diego course. Of course, we go deeply into these kinds of specific situations after looking at specific charts and unraveling all of these specific things. We see it played out over and over again after we get down and learn all of the structures and learn these kinds of principles as it relates to nakshatras, planets, houses, signs, and then all kinds of remedies through Ayurvedic remedies, yogic remedies, mantras, gems, colors, all of that stuff. Then we start seeing it in charts, and it's really powerful. So to my students watching this, you will know how to recommend things for people whose charts you read and for yourself. The first thing is to know what's happening with you, so you'll be able to do that as well. So anyway,